Hey everyone, welcome to Movie Battleground. I'm your host, Linus Babcock. This is my first time hosting, and what an exciting match to start my hosting career off with. We got Alex Worden returning versus a newcomer, but a familiar face to this league, Robert Parker. So, Alex, how do you feel about going to this match? You're 0-1, but you have a chance to redeem yourself.
Well, I will say I'm a very slim margin 0-1 if people watched my first match, but that's beside the point. I feel like I have learned from my mistakes in my first match. I know my strengths. I know my weaknesses. I'm not going to let you know what my weaknesses are, but I'm definitely coming into this with a point to prove that I deserve to be one of the top contenders, and I wasn't picked for no reason other than my popularity and my good looks.
And Robert?
Yeah, I feel great. I've sat in your chair once before, and I've watched a whole ton of matches here. So, I'm not really new to the game itself. I'm new to competing. So I spent quite a bit of time preparing everything, and I might have gone a little overboard, but we'll see. I'm here to win for sure. I'm not here to play games.
Yeah, you never can be too prepared. So let's start this off with the first question, and that is, what is the best Netflix original movie? And we're going to start this time with Alex. Your opening statement?
Well, thing is, Netflix really, the past few years of them becoming a movie studio, it's kind of taken a lot of people by surprise, myself included. I mean, it was the natural evolution, but the fact that they've done it so quickly has been phenomenal. And their first big strike of becoming a big movie studio was the distribution rights worldwide for Beasts of No Nation, the 2015 war drama starring Idris Elba and a young, sorry, I have his name written down here because I could never remember it, Abraham Atta. This film is haunting. This film shows you the conflicts of West Africa in many ways, in ways you've never seen before. And the fact that Netflix was able to get the distribution rights for it and help produce it really shows their power as a studio. This is a movie that had the potential to be an Oscar nominee the year it came out. If memory serves, it did get a lot of award accolades that year. But really, it's a big boon for Netflix. And if it weren't for the success of Beasts of No Nation, they really wouldn't have become the original film powerhouse that they have become now.
All right. And Robert, your opening statement.
All right, so like Alex said, it's a big deal, and this came by really quickly. Like, obviously, we knew Netflix somewhere along the line was going to start getting rights and start producing their own films and start, being in contention as far as a distributor. But one of their more recent installments, Fundamentals of Caring, was one that really struck a chord with me. It perfectly balances the line of a dark and sober comedy with really heart-wrenching drama. It's multiple layers. It's not one note. It's complex. It's interesting. It's complicated. It's one of the best road trip movies that I've ever seen. You have characters going through just unbelievable emotional strife and pain, and it's so relatable. Even if you're not in their situation, you understand what they're going through, you sympathize, you empathize. And a movie that makes you feel as much as Fundamentals of Caring is, I had to go with it.
All right, two very good picks, kind of unknowns, but they're Netflix films. So let's fight it out, the two of you. You got 4 minutes. Let's go.
Well, first off, you just made a point about them being unknowns. Beasts of No Nation is not an unknown film. In 2015, it was a major award season contender, critics buzz across the world, and it spiked in viewership when it took on Netflix. So many people were interested in this film that even though Netflix doesn't report their numbers, people knew there were spikes in viewership on Netflix subscriptions trying to see this movie. Whereas a movie like Fundamentals of Caring, yeah, it's heartwarming. Yeah, it's touch and go. It tries to balance comedy and drama, but really, it's a run-of-the-mill Hallmark-style movie that just happens to be produced by people who were part of Worldwide Pants, David Letterman's company, and got lucky enough to have Paul Rudd star in it. That's really the only two notable things about that film that you can really come back to.
I disagree completely. I mean, if you're trying to say it's just a run-of-the-mill movie, I mean, Beasts of No Nation is just trying way too hard to be progressive. It's it's just trying too hard. It slows down. The pace is so awkward in that movie. It's 120 minutes and it feels like 3 hours. It just feels like a repetitive exercise in beating you over the head. And hey, this is what's happening. Hey, this is what's happening. Hey, this is what's happening. You should feel for this. You should want to do something about it. But it's so repetitive. It's beating you over the head. Paul Rudd has one of his best dramatic performances ever in Fundamentals of Caring. And he's not the only notable performance. You have Selena Gomez doing a great non-winking performance. It's a genuine acting performance by her, which is something that we don't always see. And I thought she was great in the movie. Paul Rudd's character, I mean, the relationship between him and the disabled boy that he's caring for is brilliant. Their dynamic, their banter, their bonding, it's real, it's emotional, it's something that you feel in your every day-to-day life. I mean, when you really go ahead.
The one thing I will say is that, yeah, the film can have that going on the surface, but ultimately that's all that film is surface. It is a cookie cutter, by the numbers, checklist comedy drama meant to appeal to a young audience. A film like Beasts of No Nation, yeah, there are points where it goes off on tangents. There are points where it takes turns, and it's constantly keeping you on the edge of your seat, making you feel for its characters. That's what war is like. That's what the conflicts in West Africa are like. And if anything, it proves that the filmmaking style of its director, Kerry Fukunaga, the director who made True Blood, he is the real deal. It's a shame he didn't get to do much more since then because of other personal issues with studios, but this film shows his potential to have a great film in him. I don't think it's his last great film, and it really shows that in the future he can make something great.
Going on tangents is a huge understatement. That movie goes off for an hour about something that doesn't matter in the scope of the film. Like the overarching theme and story of the characters is lost because it tries so hard to do so many different things.
It matters to the story of Agu, the character we spend the most time following, the young boy who has his entire world destroyed by the actions of other people and then has to live with the people who helped destroy his life. The fact that you're going on this young boy's journey, you're seeing him go through so much in the span of 2 hours. And spoiler alert, the ending, he finally tries to have a normal life and he can't cope with it. You're seeing a young little boy who's like a soldier, who is a soldier suffering from PTSD. It is an amazing piece of filmmaking. Whereas with Fundamentals of Caring, you point out Paul Rudd's best dramatic performance. That's not even close. That is not even Paul Rudd's top 15 performances of the dude's career. I'd say This Is 40 is his best dramatic performance of all time if you haven't seen it. And ultimately, it's kind of a forgettable film in Paul Rudd's repertoire.
When you say that the character in Beasts of No Nation is living with people who destroyed his life, that may be true because that's the conflicts going on. And unfortunately, that's the reality for many people. But that's not something that a lot of audience members can really deal with. You know, in Fundamentals of Caring, you're seeing somebody his life is destroyed by himself, his own actions of just sitting inside watching TV.
All right. So time's up on the 4-minute round. Sorry, I might have not been as quick with that. But both of you have a closing statement now, and we're going to start with Alex on his closing statement. So get all your final thoughts out on your film.
Ultimately, my closing thought is this. A film like Beasts of No Nation is important in showing people exactly what it's like for people who are living these real-life situations. And the performances by the cast, especially Idris Elba playing a very haunting role as the Commandant, something we've never seen from him before and haven't seen anything like since, is just affecting on a deep level. And young Abraham Ada is just a standout. Amazing as Agu, the little boy who we have to see go through all of this, and he's taking it all in stride, just trying to live his life in the circumstances he's given. It's powerful, it's moving. If you haven't seen it, see it. It is an important film for a reason, and it deserves your attention. Whereas The Fundamentals of Caring, that's more a Netflix and chill movie.
And Robert, your final thoughts?
As far as Netflix's best original movie, first does not mean best. Beasts of No Nation is one memorable sequence, and the rest is an hour of not knowing what's going on. As with Fundamentals of Caring, you have real life things that are going on, things that are so relatable. You see this boy who meets this girl for the first time. It's his first real interaction of somebody his age. He sits in his room for years and years and years eating nothing but waffles and water. And then this first date with this girl, he eats French toast. All of us remember the first girl who made us want to eat French toast. All right. So that's, my roommate's laughing at me. I'm sorry. So that's what I'm saying. It's these real life situations that everyday people can relate to. Yes, Beasts of No Nation is an important movie, but it is not the best movie.
All right. So your 2 closing statements are up. and it's time for me to make a final decision. And this round is a pretty tough round. Both of you gave really good thoughts. I liked the thoughts about where you were going, Robert, knocking his film down because you thought it was kind of slow and boring. But Alex did counter that by saying that everything has a reason with the little boy and his journey connecting to the story. And I think I got a little more with Alex about why the film had and why it's powerful and why Netflix distribution of it was so important. While your film sounds great and you made a good argument for it, I think the first point is going to go to Alex. All right. So now we're on to the second question, and there's lots of time to come back, so that's just one question. And the second question is, what is the best modern military film? And this time we're starting with Robert. Robert, your opening thoughts?
Sure. So as far as modern military movies go, the textbook, the template for modern military movies, I think most people would agree was set by Saving Private Ryan, but there are so many movies that have come afterwards that are so much more, that elevate the genre. And that is exactly what Hacksaw Ridge is. It elevates the genre. Hacksaw Ridge is a riveting cinema. It's both a grim reckoning of the horrors of war, yet it also gives insight into the thrills of battle. It's number 172 on IMDb's top 250, and I'll get into this later, but Alex's pick isn't on that list. The hyper-violent storytelling is the best we've seen since Saving Private Ryan. A veteran named Hunter says, "I felt numb after seeing Hacksaw Ridge. This is what battle is like. It's chaos. There are so many brilliant scenes and performances, but every inch of this movie is better. From a technical filmmaking standpoint, from an acting standpoint, from the directing standpoint, from a score standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, Hacksaw Ridge is the best modern war film."
All right, Alex, your opening thoughts?
Well, he kind of did spoil something there, but I will say one thing about my film first. My choice is Catherine Bigelow's The Hurt Locker. It follows the premise of being a modern war movie in that it is based on a modern conflict. Not just that, it is the best movie made modern about modern warfare. It's a movie that, when it came out in 2009, blew audiences away. It may not be on the IMDb top 250, as Robert said, but that doesn't mean it still did not have an impact on cinema in general. The film portrays modern warfare from a standpoint we've never really seen before in film. What happens when a soldier goes into combat and likes it? What happens when somebody goes out there and they get addicted to it? I'll cover that a little bit later, but the technical achievement of this film is portraying the modern conflicts in the Middle East in a way we had yet to see, in addition to the portrayal of a soldier, the likes of which we had yet to see, and creating a phenomenal film.
All right, we got two good opening statements there, and we got 4 minutes for you to both debate these films and say why yours is better, starting now.
All right, so you said it blew audiences away in 2009. Nobody's talked about it since. That's because it's so forgettable. If you're talking about the best movie about, even if you're talking modern warfare, that's Zero Dark 30. That's Catherine Bigelow's best war movie, and even that is blown out of the water by Hacksaw Ridge. You cannot argue just because it's about modern war, that means nothing. Modern war movie means it was made in modern times. That point is mute against me. Nobody talks about Hurt Locker anymore because it's so forgettable. It's so forgettable. It's so bland. It doesn't hold up. It was good in 2009, but it's poor now. Bigelow's movies always are great on, this is just a side note about Catherine Bigelow. They're great on release and they fizzle out over time. That's exactly what Hurt Locker has done. Zero Dark 30 is her superior war movie. That's almost what I went with, but Hacksaw Ridge is better. It's Mel Gibson's best movie. It's Andrew Garfield's best performance. Hugo Weaving's best dramatic performance. Vince Vaughn's best dramatic performance. Sam Worthington's. Vince Vaughn is a great dramatic actor in this movie. I don't love Vince Vaughn as an actor. He's great in this movie.
I'm going to cut you off here. Mel Gibson's best movie is Braveheart. Andrew Garfield's best movie is The Social Network. Vince Vaughn's best movie is still Wedding Crashers. This movie is
dramatic performance.
This movie is 55% ad revenue for being a Seventh-day Adventist, 45% Mel Gibson torture porn. It is gore, violence, blood over the top to the point where you want to leave the theater because you want to vomit. That's
exactly what Saving Private Ryan was, and it's hailed as the best war movie ever made because it's realistic. That's what Battle was. That was what my quote from the veteran was. That's what it is. It's realistic.
The point I'd like to counter is that The Hurt Locker was so realistic that the real-life Lieutenant William James sued the writer and the producers of the film for being so accurate in the representation of him. He was portrayed as a psychopath, and he thought it was defamation. Many people have said the film is a perfect adaptation of what modern conflict in the Middle East is. Great performances by Jeremy Renner as William James, Anthony Mackie as J.T. Sanborn, phenomenal performances from the two predating their successes in the MCU, supporting great performances from Guy Pearce as another army officer who meets an unfortunate end very early in the film, Evangeline Lilly as a war-torn, almost widow and ex-wife who completely just cannot deal with her ex-husband, and Ray Fiennes in a great cameo as a PMC contractor who you honestly believe is the macho dude bro. This movie does one thing very well with war films that you don't really get very often. It makes you look at your protagonist, root for him, but in the back of your mind think, wait, in any other story, this guy's the villain. This guy's the asshole. This is the guy you want to see dead at the end of the movie. But you still root for him because he is doing a good job, and he is good at his job.
We've seen that in other movies. Hurt Locker didn't show me anything I haven't seen before in other war movies. Hacksaw Ridge did. It's not just yours is just a story about defusing bombs. Or it's not just a story about defusing bombs. I wish it was. It's a simplistic story with simplistic characters and simplistic relationships and simplistic writing with a weak dramatic question and a sluggish pace. It has obnoxious shaky cam that leads to so not intense action sequences with unmemorable performances. Hacksaw Ridge is anything but. It is so memorable. It literally brought audiences to the brink of tears. The scene where Andrew Garfield is shimmying people down the ledge is one of the most memorable scenes in all of the last 5 years of cinema, in the last 10 years of cinema. It's so memorable. It brings so many great performances. We haven't talked about this yet. It is a fantastic score. Hurt Locker's score is and I don't even know who wrote it. You can tell that Rupert Gregson Williams wrote the score for Hacksaw Ridge. Hurt Locker is so unfocused. The pace is so strange in the middle. It's Zero Dark 30 is so much better. Why didn't you go with that?
Well, no, Zero Dark 30 is not a great film.
Sorry,
because
time.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
I'm sorry. I need to keep better track on that. But
That's
closing thoughts, we're starting with Robert.
All right. Hacksaw Ridge is memorable, emotional, well-written, well-filmed, and brilliant. Hurt Locker is overrated. It was great when it came out, but it doesn't hold up. It doesn't deserve the accolades it did. The technical stuff, maybe both of our movies are technically very, very well made, but as far as from a directing standpoint, from performance standpoints, Best Picture, absolutely not. Catherine Bigelow's Hurt Locker does not hold up at all. We see the flaws bigger than in any other modern war film years after its release. Hacksaw Ridge is brilliant, and you can't poke any holes in that.
Hacksaw Ridge is currently suffering from recency bias. This is a film that only came out last year. Like most other Mel Gibson films, in 5 years' time, you're going to sit back and look at it and go, holy crap, that guy was a sadistic psycho. Why is 45% of his movie people getting their limbs cut off and blood spurting everywhere? With The Hurt Locker, there is a reason Catherine Bigelow beat her ex-husband to win Best Director the year it was out, 2009. She made a deep, affecting war film, giving us a perspective of soldiers in modern conflict, which we have never seen before. And the only thing that can get close to it was her follow-up film, Zero Dark 30. That is not a superior film because they had to rush the conclusion of the film due to real-life events. This film is a finite story, which, yes, it has pacing issues in the middle, but much like my previous answer, Beasts of No Nation, it follows the real flow of real life and real conflict and the things that can happen that instantly shake your life in a moment when you are trapped in a theater of war.
All right, that's it. We heard both your arguments. Now I got to make
Alex,
a decision.
Can I ask you a question real quick? Do you know who scored Hurt Locker?
Nope, didn't bother to look it up.
I don't know either. I was just curious.
I don't think anyone knows who scored Hurt Locker.
Yeah, I know.
All right. So a lot of good points were made in this argument. There were a lot of back and forth for sure. There was one point I wrote for Robert that I thought was an amazing point that was going to win the match. But Alex kind of knocked it down when you said that veterans kind of cried for that film. And then Alex said, well, veterans were mad at his film for being so ultra realistic. But Robert did bring it back by saying that people cried, that it's one of the best scenes we've seen. He pointed out specific details like that one scene. And he pointed out how it will have a lasting impact because of that, and the gore is worth it. And while Alex made a great argument for 0 Dark 30, Robert had so many points about his film that he got in. So I think I'm giving this point to Robert. So the score is now 1-1.
Okay, fair enough.
This next one's the one I'm worried about.
Thought fights.
This next one's the one I'm worried about.
It'll be interesting. So, question 3, we're doing what is the best fantasy novel adaptation? And we're going to start with Alex on this one. Alex, your opening thoughts.
No. Let the Hobbit go. Let the Hobbit go first.
I'm fine with that.
You all right with this?
Yeah.
All right. Hobbit, you're going first. What's your fantasy novel adaptation?
So, I did honestly think really, really hard about this one. It will come as no surprise to you that I didn't end up picking The Fellowship of the Ring, but I was not initially leaning that way. And I'll tell you why I made the decision in a minute. But basically, The Fellowship of the Ring is one of the best films ever made. With the second highest number of Academy Award nominations at 13, it's one of those rare movies, and novels especially, that takes place in the fantasy world, but it feels real. It's almost like you're watching a documentary of actual history unfolding with such interesting characters on screen. Tolkien as a novelist is one of the best storytellers of all time. As screenwriters, Fran Walsh, Peter Jackson, Philippa Boyens, they bring his legendarium to life. When you ask what the best fantasy adaptation is, it takes into account the best novel, the best film, and the most faithful adaptation to the source material, which is where Fellowship of the Ring shines. The writing, acting, directing, and design of Fellowship make it feel like real history, not fantasy, and it feels relatable. In both the novel and the film, Fellowship of the Ring is one of the most tightly constructed stories ever made.
Alex, you didn't want to go first, so let's hear your opening thoughts. Going second.
The reason I didn't want to go first is because I knew he would pick Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I wanted to go second is because, firstly, my pick is The Princess Bride, an undisputed classic of not only genre filmmaking and fantasy filmmaking, but very possibly one of the greatest comedies of the 80s and the best fantasy adaptation of all time, in such that it subverts the idea of being an adaptation in its premise of it being a story told from a book by a grandfather helping his sick grandson get to bed. Whereas the Hobbit movies, I call them all the Hobbit movies, they are masturbatory filmmaking at their finest. They are from a filmmaker so beholden to J.R.R. Tolkien's tomes, you could guarantee you walk into his house and he has first editions of all 3 of those books, but the pages are stuck together. This is cinematic porn from a fanboy. Nothing more, and it's always going to be that. The Lord of the Rings films have not held up. They have not. You go rewatch The Princess Bride, that movie is still as great as it was now as when it was released in 1987. It just had a re-release in theaters a couple of weeks ago. It still holds up. Lord of the Rings films, nobody cared about them 3 years after they came out. They only recently came back into prominence because of how good they are compared to the Hobbit trilogy. But even then, that's like saying last place, second last place.
Those are some interesting statements for sure. And we got 4 minutes for you two both to discuss those statements. And I'm excited to hear this.
All right, you say it's porn from a fanboy. It's a perfect adaptation of one of the greatest stories ever told. Princess Bride isn't faithful to the novel, and it's not the best adaptation. Like, if you're asking me what the best fantasy adaptation is, you have to say what is the best book, the best movie, and how do they relate to each other. That's not what Princess Bride does. Princess Bride can't even cite its fucking sources correctly.
No,
it says the wrong author of the novel in the movie.
Princess Bride does exactly what the novel did. It subverts the genre it is claiming to be part of. Its adaptation is subversive in its story framing narrative. Not to mention, it's got amazing performances from Cary Elwes, Mandy Patinkin, Robin Wright, Andre the Giant, Wallace Shawn. The movie is so insanely quotable. You could walk down the street and say, hey, do you know a quote from Princess Bride? You're going to get 10 different examples. You ask for a quote from Lord of the Rings, you're going to get someone probably quoting one of Gollum's 3 most memorable lines.
Oh, that's not true at all.
Has not held up. And
that's not true at all.
Back to the 2000s, it is a filmmaker who had completely lost touch at that point because he took himself too far. Tolkien's novels were already adapted better in the Rankin Bass animated productions of the 1970s and 80s. This
That's
is
not true.
filmmaking from a fanboy who takes the source material and wants to get every little bit of minutia, but forgets how to tell a cinematic story. He
Who
is
wrote
so
The Princess Bride?
That's not what the question is.
Who wrote The Princess Bride? And who in the movie do they say is the writer of The Princess Bride? It's two different people. It's two different people. Just because it subverts a genre, that means it's not even a fantasy movie. It's a comedy. It's not fantasy. It has fantasy themes and fantasy elements. The Princess Bride is not a fantasy movie. It is a comedy. It is a quotable comedy. It's a good movie. I like it. It's a fine movie. It's not a fantasy movie. It's a dreadful adaptation. The book is hyper violent. Inigo Montoya cuts out the guy's heart. That doesn't happen in the book or in the movie. And I'm not saying that it should, but it's a kid's movie. It's a family movie. It's a comedy. It is not a fantasy movie.
It is an adaptation made for its audience. Its audience was trying to get young boys in the 1980s interested in fantasy literature and fantasy filmmaking. A job it very well accomplished. The Lord of the Rings job was to be a faithful adaptation of Tolkien's novels. Peter Jackson took things too far and spent 10 hours splooging special effects everywhere to the point that ultimately you get bored. The films become unwatchable. You watch them once, you never want to watch them again.
All right, that's not true at all. First off, Rob Reiner didn't think that people would find the characters in the film relatable, so he actually invented the grandfather and grandson roles to try to make the story more humanized, and it ruins the intention of the book. The whole point of the book is to subvert the fantasy genre amidst comedy and amidst all of these other storytelling devices, but the movie...
Which is what the film does.
That's not true at all. Every time that the movie... every time...
And the point is... no adaptation is 100% faithful. No one will ever make a 100% faithful adaptation of any piece of literature because doing so is not cinematic. In Peter Jackson's attempt to make a 100% faithful adaptation of the Lord of the Rings franchise, he basically committed himself to something akin to insanity. And ultimately, yes, he made 3 films that were hits with fans, but nobody goes back and rewatches them. Only sadists go back and rewatch them.
That's not true at all.
You also have not even selected the best of the Lord of the Rings movies. Two Towers is a superior film.
No. Okay, you before you listed some cast here, let me go for you. Viggo Mortensen, Orlando Bloom, Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, Billy Boyd, Dominic Monaghan, Sean Bean, Sean Astin, Liv Tyler, John Rhys-Davies, Christopher Lee, Kate Blanchett, Hugo Weaving, Ian Holmes, Sala Baker, Martin Sokas. Do you want me to keep going? Because I will. These are some of the best actors ever, and these are the best performances ever. Just every single character moment in Princess Bride is interrupted by a cheek-pinching grandma and his baseball son, and that is not fantasy.
Time. All right. Just to be clear, we accepted Alex's answer. I don't want to go off the semantic that it's not fantasy because it is. That's the genre. It's accepted. I just want to say that now because I don't want to do a game on semantics because that's how I lost my match, and I didn't like it. So, Robert, your ending statement.
Every hole you've tried to punch in my movie, you've talked about The Lord of the Rings. You have not said a single thing against Fellowship in particular, which is the movie I'm arguing. Those are the actors I presented. That's the design of the film, the world of the film, the scope. Everything is in Fellowship. It's absolutely the best Lord of the Rings. That's not what we're arguing. It's the best fantasy adaptation. It's not just Peter Jackson trying to put special effects everywhere. Actually, Weta Workshop was the person, or the company, who did most of the effects, and a vast majority of them were practical effects. So that's not him splooging visual effects everywhere. That's faithful adaptation of the world that Tolkien created. These are the best film that is a fantasy film, the best fantasy novel, the best adaptation of the two. Princess Bride subverts a genre, and that doesn't make it better. That makes it trying to hide what it's trying to be. The grandson and grandfather, which many people quote the most often, like you said, it's so quotable. That's the funniest part. It's taken away from the heart of the Princess Bride story, which was written by William Goldman, not by S. Morgenstern that they say it was written about in the movie. They literally I understand that it's technically a fantasy movie. It has fantasy themes, but the intentions of the book, the hyper-violence of the book, does not make its way onto the film, and that's a problem.
All right, Alex, your final statements.
First off, I love the fact that I got you to say splooging so much. Secondly, my point about the Fellowship of the Ring not being the best film in the franchise stands with this. J.R.R. Tolkien never intended the books to be 3 separate books. He wrote it as one manuscript, one large novel. It was his editor's decisions to cut it into 3 separate stories. And that's the point. Fellowship of the Ring is the beginning of the story. It's meant to set you up for the characters and the world. We don't need to spend 3 hours doing that. The real meat and potatoes of Tolkien's Middle-earth universe is in the Two Towers and paying off in Return of the King. The Fellowship of the Ring is legitimately the only one of the 3 films that you can skip, and you can watch the other 2, and you only need a quick little 5-minute clip show to catch you up to speed. The other 2 films become completely unmissable because of the pace of storytelling. With a film like The Princess Bride and The Princess Bride itself, you have legitimately a 93-minute film that turns cynics into believers in the fantasy genre because of its great performances, because of its great storytelling, its setting, its characters, its music, and its engrossing narrative of subverting the genre, making you think you're not going to like this story with the framing device of the little boy, who at the end is so engrossed that he wants to hear more, just like the audience.
That was a great round. I think that's probably one of the best rounds we've had in this show. That was very interesting. Lots of points back and forth. Again, my decision was going back and forth, and this is a tough one. I know I might get some hate for this, but I think I'm going with Alex on this one. I think he
didn't say a single thing about Fellowship until his closing.
You're allowed to use your closing to bring up points, and he made so many points that he said that
he talked about Lord of the Rings the entire time, not my movie. I'm sorry, like I don't mean to start shit. Like you can, I understand why.
Okay. I'm still thinking through the decision, but I think all the points he said where the Princess Bride, it's more quotable, and you can completely skip the Fellowship, that it doesn't work, and it was all booked together. He had a very
But that's an argument against Lord of the Rings, not an argument against my movie. That's an argument against the trilogy.
But is that not an argument of why my movie's better?
No, it's not.
He's saying that...
I mean, no, I'll stop talking about it. You can... I understand that, but
I'm still working through the decision right there.
He didn't talk about Fellowship until the ending. And I didn't say that in my argument because I knew he wasn't saying it. But let's just go to the next one.
I think if you bring it up at the ending, I think it still counts for the argument.
And the only thing he said is that you can
a little stronger.
Okay.
He said that it was special effects full. He just
made it wasn't
more quotable, more of a classic, and it was. Yeah, but you didn't say it wasn't.
Yes, I did. I said there was only practical effects. I said it wasn't special effects.
Practical effects are still special effects.
Talking about
visual effects and practical are just two separate disciplines.
I'm talking about the quoting
I quoted the movie in my argument. I don't know if you've never seen it, but I quoted my movie.
I've seen Lord of the Rings, but
okay, let's go.
Do you want to challenge this?
No, it's fine. I don't want to be the dick.
No, it's okay. This was a very, very close round. I think Alex had just a tiny bit more passion, and he just brought up a little more points. But we got one question. It's only 2-1. We're going to the speed round for sure. So, final question is, what movie from another genre should be turned into a comedy? And we're starting with Alex this time, for real. Okay. Alex, you're starting.
That's fine, because honestly, I was told by many people, not just my opponent, when I made my choice, that I'm a madman. I'm insane. There is no way that this will work. But my choice for a film from another genre that you could turn into a comedy, I think would become one of the greatest comedies of all time. Apocalypse Now, or as I would title it, Apocalypse Now? Seriously, there's not much you have to do with Apocalypse Now to turn it into a comedy. All you have to do is just change around a little bit of the dialogue phrasing, amp the characters up ever so slightly in their stereotypical portrayals, and just turn Willard into a complete drunk rather than feigning the idea that he's a drunk. And you have the makings of one of the greatest comedies of all time.
All right, Robert, your opening statement.
All right, so I find I chose a horror movie, which may come as a surprise to some people because it's no secret that I'm not the biggest horror fan in the world. And that's mostly because I find that horror flicks with the best premises have atrocious executions. It's just awful. The production and the execution of many horror films is just atrocious. And The Gallows, which is my pick, is a fairly recent horror movie, and it's exactly this. It's a fairly decent premise with an awful execution. It's utterly unmemorable. It maybe has some killer theater kids, and it's found footage, and it's just atrocious. The execution is awful. And The Gallows should be remade into a found footage spoof as a comedy, because maybe we can make fun of the genre and the dumbass people in horror movies that are like, oh, look, let's go run into that closet and hide in there. Like, the horror genre is a genre that is just waiting to have a great, great modern horror spoof, and this is going to be it. You're gonna make fun of the people that literally, when you're watching, you want them to die because they're making such bad decisions. This is the kind of spoof comedy that The Gallows can be.
All right, 4 minutes. Let's fight this out.
Okay, first off, horror spoof comedies have already died. That's exactly what the Scary Movie franchise did, to the point where the Wayans brothers just tried to revive that genre 2 years ago with A Haunted House, and it fell flat on its face. With Apocalypse Now, you already have the makings of what could be a great comedy film with its cast: Martin Sheen, Lawrence Fishburne, Marlon Brando, Dennis Hopper, Robert Duvall in a great cameo performance. Again, all you have to do is just dial each character up ever so slightly. Turn Willard into a complete drunk. Turn Lawrence Fishburne into a ghetto kid. Turn the California Surfer into a California Surfer dude. Make Robert Duvall a complete cowboy. And turn Colonel Kurtz into a completely out of his mind, heroin-addled, fat, depressing old man, to the point where Willard is like, I can't believe we ever thought this guy was a threat. I should have no problem taking him out. Honestly, you don't have to change much about the film except amp up the characters' portrayals a little bit, change around the dialogue so some statements are more question-like, and you have the makings of a great comedy film. Whereas, as you pointed out, horror spoof, that's all you would get out of an adaptation of The Gallows as a comedy. And the horror spoof genre is dead, and ultimately, spoofs really can only exist nowadays on YouTube. The spoof genre in general has been dead for years. Internet killed it, and it ain't coming back.
Doesn't have to be theatrically released. It could be made and put on Netflix or put on Amazon Prime or Hulu. It could be put. This could be the next best Netflix original movie for all I care. What I'm saying is that Apocalypse Now is a near perfect movie. First off, you want to dial up the character performances. That's getting super stereotypical, and it's 2017, and people are going to be angry at you for doing that. People are going to be real upset at that. Second off, it's Francis Ford Coppola's arguably one of his best movies. Marlon Brando, one of his best movies. Harrison Ford is in there. Lawrence Fishburne, one of his best movies. Martin Sheen, Dennis Hopper, Robert Duvall. You saw all these brilliant actors. You are spitting on the legacy of this brilliant director, these brilliant actors. You're spitting on the legacy of a masterpiece of filmmaking. That is number 50 on the IMDb top 250 movies of all time. Remember what happened last time? Something that was heralded as so great got turned into a comedy, or not turned into a comedy, got remade. That was Ghostbusters. And that was just, we'll not talk about that, but.
Exactly. I'm not talking about completely changing the movie, recasting it, making it a new story, just set in the same universe.
Going to make it offensive to literally everybody on Earth.
I'm also not saying this movie would have to be made today. I'm saying you could easily recut the movie and also just overdub the dialogue. It doesn't matter, though.
Well, then you're going to get copyright claimed, but yeah.
The point is, Apocalypse Now, if it was made as a comedy, would have been one of the most amazing comedies about war of all time. It would have been on the same level as Dr. Strangelove, whereas what you're proposing is nothing more than a spoof. If it was on Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, wherever, nobody would watch it. The only way people would watch something like that nowadays is if it was a video made by a YouTube star and done as a 20-minute YouTube Red special, and even then it probably wouldn't pull in that much viewership. Everyone has been done with horror spoofs ever since Scary Movie 3, and ultimately, they're not coming back for a reason. They're old. They're tired. Studios like Blumhouse, who constantly shoot out horror movies each year, like yours, The Gallows, there's a reason they're shooting these movies out. They're cheap. They're easy to produce. They don't care about satisfying an audience. They care about making a movie on tax breaks so they can rake in as much profits as possible.
Horror movie spoofs. Okay. A horror movie spoof of a found footage film has never been done well, and that can revitalize the genre just by adding in that found footage. Instantly, people are
15 seconds.
Can we see how much money Blair Witch made? Found footage movies, people watch them. As for yours, you said if it would have been made a comedy. Those were your exact words. We're not talking about if it had been made back in the 70s as a comedy. We're talking remaking it. If you remake a movie as perfect as Apocalypse Now.
Time. All right, now it's time for the closing thoughts. We're starting with Alex. This is the last main round point, so get out your best arguments and go.
The question was not what movie would be better remade as a comedy. It's what movie from another genre would be better as a comedy, and that's the point I'm making. You have to make minimal changes to Apocalypse Now in order to make it a great comedy. I'm not saying you go that far to the point of offending people in characterizations. I'm saying you completely take the lead character of Captain Willard, amp up the performances of people around him to make them more comedic, amp the dialogue up to make it a little bit more whimsical, have the final scene, have Kurtz die of a heart attack when he's spooked by Willard dropping something because he's a drunk, and dying of a heart attack before Willard can drive in the knife. And to your point about horror movies and the found footage genre not being spoofed yet, there's a reason. Nobody cares about the found footage genre anymore. Nobody's cared since the second Paranormal Activity movie, and those movies are a dying breed. Horror movies nowadays need to reinvent themselves, and the movie It has proven that by reinventing a classic film genre of a scary monster. They don't need to go back a step in a genre that they've already tried and failed with, and that goes the same for horror comedy spoofs.
Robert, your final thoughts?
People do still care about found footage movies. A ton of people went to go see the Blair Witch sequel. A ton of people, like, Gallows made money. Like, these are not movies that are dead. These are not movies that there are 3 people in the theater for. These are movies that bring people in. And the exact wording of the question is, what movie from another genre should be remade as a comedy? And if you remake Apocalypse Now, you are spitting on the legacy of Francis Ford Coppola. You're spitting on the legacy of all these amazing actors, and you're spitting on the legacy of a masterpiece of filmmaking.
All right, time. I think there's a point that went one way. I think if the question was, what film would be better as a comedy, I would give it to Alex. But the question is, what film would be better remade as a comedy? And Robert is right. You would be spitting on a classic right there. And if you remake Robert's film, I don't think anyone's really going to care that much. No one's going to be upset. And question is remade. If the question was worded differently, it might go a different way, but I have to give that point to Robert.
Okay, fair point.
So it's 2-2 going into the speed round, so it's definitely anyone's game. And I wrote the speed round question, so let's see how this goes.
So we just shout out an answer, right?
Yeah, and you'll get 20 seconds first, and then you'll get 10 seconds.
Okay.
So let's see which one we want to start with. I'll start with this one. What is the best movie with a holiday in the title?
Independence Day?
That counts.
National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Right, Robert, we're starting with you, and 20 seconds.
Independence Day is the best fantasy action movie ever made. It's one of Will Smith's best movies. It's one of the best movies of the entire decade of the 90s. National Lampoon's is so overrated, and it does not hold up at all. Nobody thinks it's funny anymore. It's been rewatched to death. It's been redone better to death. You have a movie like Independence Day, which is
That's 20
memorable
seconds.
Time.
And Alex, 20 seconds for Christmas Vacation.
Christmas Vacation doesn't need to hold up. Christmas Vacation is a timeless classic and a capsule of the 80s comedy. Independence Day is not even Roland Emmerich's best fantasy action film. That money still goes to his first major release in Stargate. Christmas Vacation is instantly quotable, a family holiday classic, and a film that everyone to this day should still watch around the holidays, and most do.
All right, that's time. And Robert, 10 seconds. You can take your time if needed, but 10 seconds when you start talking.
We're not arguing Roland Emmerich's best movie. We're not even arguing the best comedy of the 80s. We're not arguing the most rewatchable holiday movie, because those are not that's not the argument. Independence Day is a far superior film to Lampoon's. You said it's timeless, yet it doesn't hold up. Those are conflicting arguments. It does not hold up, meaning it's not timeless.
All right, Robert got a few extra seconds, so Alex, you can have a few extra seconds, and time begins when you start.
The point I made was that it doesn't hold up by modern standards, but if you go back and watch it, it draws you back into 80s nostalgia. Independence Day does not hold up either. Its effects, its acting, its script, it is all terrible and cheesy and the worst of 90s action drama.
Time. So interesting points made by both of you. I think Alex got this one by saying how Independence, it's not even the best film by that director in that genre. And Will Smith, I mean, the performances are cheesy, the movie's kind of cheesy. While Christmas Vacation is a movie everyone should see and is a fun family film. So Alex gets the first speed round point. It's 2-3.
Yeah, that's
and
fair.
The second speed round question is, what is the worst animated movie character?
Character?
Yeah, worst animated movie character.
Tamatoa from Moana. That's the giant crab thing.
All right.
I'm going to argue Minions.
Oh,
Minions versus the big crab. Robert, you're up first. 20 seconds. Whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Tamatoa was the worst part of that movie. His song, his entire scene was completely different from the entire tone of the movie. Moana would have been a great classic of Disney. It would have been a great animated movie. It would have been the best movie of that year. But that movie, that part, his character ruined the movie. It ruined the tone. It ruined everything. Minions makes money.
All right. Alex, you got 20 seconds to argue Minions.
Minions has become the bane of existence to anyone who has a child aged 10 and under and has had to grow up watching the Despicable Me films. They are annoying, they are loud, they are obnoxious, they are everywhere, they are in your face, and they have oversaturated the market. Tamatoa is actually a very fun performance by Jermaine Clement, voicing a very great character in Moana, who actually lightens the tone of the movie at a moment where it could be very perilous.
Time.
And like the tone of the film.
Time. All right, 10 seconds. Robert, here you go. And Robert, if you don't hit this one, you have to hit the last two in order to force a tie and take it into sudden death. So here you go.
Minions has one bad movie, and it's their own movie. They are great in Despicable Me 1 and 2. They're actually really fun if you go back and watch those movies. Tamatoa, you said it was good in a moment that could have been really dull. That whole movie was supposed to be really dull, and it lightened up the mood. No, it was terrible. It ruined the tone of the entire film. It ruined the scope of the entire film.
Time. Alex, whenever you're ready. 10 seconds.
The scope of Moana is believing in what Moana can do, and in that moment, she actually saves Maui from Tamatoa. The Minions have oversaturated the market, and ultimately, going back, their film appearances prior to their own film have been ruined by their oversaturation with their own feature.
All right, and time. Now, this was a very interesting argument. This is a tough one. I think I'm going to give the point to Robert just because he said the Minions are decent in their first two films and they make a lot of money, and you can't really argue that. And he says his is worse because it kind of ruins, it has one bad scene in the movie, which without that it would have been perfect, and it's just off the tone for that film. So I'm giving Robert the point, and we're tied 3-3.
Okay. Wait, no. Wait, we're tied. Yeah, we are tied, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And for your third sudden death question, it is what is the worst movie weapon?
Worst movie weapon?
Yeah, the worst weapon used in a movie.
The Omega-13 drive.
All right.
The glaive from Krull.
All right. Robert, you're up first. 20 seconds when you're ready.
All right, the Omega-13 drive makes no sense from Galaxy Quest. If you use it, you can go back in time once, 10 seconds back in time once to correct one mistake. That's completely useless. You can use it once and then you're going to die the next second later if you're in a battle. It's completely useless. No practical applications whatsoever. The whatever thing from Krull clearly has more practical applications than Omega-13.
Alex?
The Omega-13 drive is practical in the way they use it in the film. It actually does help them save the day. The glaive from Krull is a 5-bladed shuriken that can fly completely out of your control. So if you're not concentrated for the exact moment you need to use the weapon, it's going to slice your hand off or go right through your neck. The Omega-13 drive at least had practical use in saving the story.
10 seconds, and this is for the marbles, the win. Robert, 10 seconds, your final argument.
You say they might be distracted. The only people we see use the glaive are always focused, always use it. They're never going to cut their hand off. They're experts. They are trained. They are ready to use this weapon. The Omega-13 drive you can use it once. That makes no sense. It's not practical in a lifelong of adventures in space, in galaxy.
Time. And Alex, whenever you're ready. And I gave him 15 seconds because it's the last point and it's special. So whenever you're ready.
It's the threat of the glaive being unwieldy and unreasonable that makes it dangerous and makes it completely impractical. The Omega-13 drive is a classic film MacGuffin unit that in this case just happens to have a name and a use, and it's played out perfectly in a perfect narrative way to help save the story and continue the plot moving forward. It's not useless. It actually has a use, and it's used very well.
Time. All right. This is a tough one.
I just thought of a better one, too.
Yeah, I think I got to give this point to Alex.
Yeah.
He argued that the weapon has a use, even if it's just one use. And your argument was good. I thought about the hand slicing off, but if they're going to be using it, I think a weapon being dangerous isn't much of a slight against it. This was a tough speed round. It was a very tough match. This was 4-3. You had a great performance, Robert. This was a great showing. So, Alex, you finally got a win. How do you feel?
I wouldn't say it's finally. I've only had one match before this, but it feels good to get a win in the record books.
Yeah.
Robert took me right to the limit, and I've got to give you all the credit in the world. After I lost that Apocalypse Now question, I thought I was done for. Pulled this out by the skin of my teeth, and I couldn't have had a better opponent in this one. Robert, my hand's off to you. That was an amazing performance.
And Robert, that was such a narrow defeat. The Lord of the Rings question was tough, but you can argue maybe the Apocalypse Now one should have went the other way or whatever, stuff like that. So it kind of balanced itself out maybe, but this was a really tough match. You gave a great performance. You were really passionate. How do you feel?
I feel okay. I just didn't want to get shut out, and I didn't. Like I said, this is my first time really competing, so I kind of had to get a feel for things. I definitely know what things from an argument standpoint I need to improve on for the future. So I definitely think Alex's experience probably played into his hands a little bit more there. I'm still pissed off that I lost the Lord of the Rings thing, but I'll take that up with Linus in the parking lot. And yeah, that's about it.
I'm still pissed about Andrew from a question from my match, so join the club.
No, it's all good.
Anyways, so let's close this out. Where can we find you guys? Alex?
Well, currently, I think most people here, thanks to Cross Pollination, know me from the brand new Full Metal Trivia League live on YouTube every week on Monday, and check out our Facebook page. If you want to, you can find me on Twitter at AlexWorden34, and I promise y'all, if you are Full Metal Trivia fans, y'all got some special stuff coming down the pipeline, and you can also see me back here in just a few weeks' time. Tying into the release of Justice League, I'm going toe-to-toe with Andrew Hayes in a DC Movies match, and trust me, I have a personal score to settle with Andrew thanks to some goings-on in my league, and I'm going to show no mercy.
Don't we all? Don't we all? And Robert, where can we find you?
You can find me everywhere. You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at RBRTPRKR98. Make sure you follow me on those platforms. You can see me competing in trivia leagues all over the place. I'm in the playoffs for There Will Be Trivia. That's going to be coming up soon, so make sure you hit that up. I'll be in that team league as well. I've been on Full Metal Trivia a couple of times. That's been tons of fun. Over on Take 3, I'm in a couple things over there. You can see me hosting here a couple of times. So I'm kind of everywhere. So just hit me up for sure.
All right, and I'm Linus Babcock. Hopefully I didn't mess up completely hosting, but this was fun. These are two great competitors. You can find me on the Movie Trivia Schmodown Facebook page. I'm an admin there. Message me, stuff like that. I'm an admin here. I have a match coming up against my teammate, Zach Ford, and Andrew Hayes. Hopefully I can take Andrew Hayes down for some vendetta I have against him as well. And I'm also in There Will Be Trivia this season if I get my 4th match filmed, which we're still discussing. And this was a lot of fun. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, That Movie Guy. Join the Movie Battleground Facebook page. Message us if you want to have a match, and we'll try to schedule you as soon as possible. And until next time, there will be a battleground in movies.
Nice.
Ooh.